Okay, can everybody see the slideshow?
Yes, that's visible on my screen here, Janet.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah.
Is it a full screen? You can never tell sometimes what you're looking at. So, okay, brilliant. Okay, so this new assessment plan came out around in about June this year, and it's quite a bit radically changed, really, in relation to what they're looking at. I had a discussion with Matt yesterday about this, and I've had a discussion with a few EPA assessors, and I think there's been a rationale around this about cutting the number of assessment methods, but also I think, looking at it, I think they were quite wary, the people that developed the Trailblazer group, about the number of people that were going through with distinctions. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but I think what they've done is they've made it in line with other level 3 qualifications in relation to, they've dropped the knowledge test but made it more of a discussion and work based more than academic based. So the changes at the moment, there are 3 assessment methods. Now there are only going to be 2. One of which is a portfolio-based professional discussion, and you probably all know that, and a presentation with questions and answers. The big difference here is all criteria has to be met. There is no waiting. What they're saying now is they've got to hit all the pass criteria for the whole assessment plan to get a pass, and they've got to hit all the distinction to get the distinction. So there's no 70%, 50%, there's none of that anymore. They're saying all criteria has to be met. So what they've done, they've said, in order to get through Gateway, of course, they still have to complete their level 2 maths and English as it is a level 3 qualification. But what they're also is, you have to also submit a portfolio of evidence with a mapping document. Now that portfolio of evidence is, they state the criteria that that portfolio has to meet. And the training provider, the learner and the employer would have to then look at the evidence they're going to be submitting, complete the mapping documents to state where the evidence is. And if you remember, I mean, I've been an assessor for God knows how many years. Remember the old portfolio, they had an index at the front, what it is, where it is. You can flip through your portfolio and find it. That's what the mapping document is, really. It's a case of what it is and where is it. Of course, it's an authentication document as well. So with Summit, we ask for an authenticity document to state, the learner will state that that is their work, or solely their work, and that has to be authorised by their employer and their training provider. The first assessment method is a presentation. Now, the presentation has to be completed within 2 weeks, and it's completed after Gateway. Once the apprentice has gone through Gateway, a title will be given by the independent assessor to the apprentice to complete a presentation to meet all the criteria attached to this assessment method. Now, at the moment, we have 7 titles in relation to the presentation. Now, these will be added to and changed, but not that much. This is what they've recommended as some of the presentation titles. Now, as you can see, a lot of them are, when you're looking at them, they're quite a large range that can be incorporated within them presentation titles. The presentation title has to be agreed with both the apprentice and their employer. I was discussing with Matt yesterday that an employer might not like one of the titles and feel that's not right, and then can come in discussion with the End Point Assessment Organisation and go, I feel the apprentice would be better doing this one. And that's a negotiation, but most employers will be happy to take on the presentation title that we've allocated to that person. Now, how do we go about allocating? It's just a general randomisation. It's probably what we would also probably do is look at the portfolio of evidence they've submitted through Gateway and see what sort of areas they're developing, what they're working in. So we're not going to make it so we set them up to fail, but sort of a presentation title that can get the most out of them and hit all the criteria they need to meet. The timeframes for this are going to be once the title has been set. Now, once the person has gone through Gateway, the End Point Assessor will contact the learner and give them the title of the presentation. They then have 2 weeks, so you're talking 10 working days, yeah, for submission of that presentation to the End Point Assessment Organisation, which to us will be Summit. So they have 2 weeks to put together a presentation and then submit it to Summit. What then will happen is the independent assessor will then look at the presentations and then they will prepare relevant questions around that. As a result from that, 2 weeks after the submission, the endpoint assessment of that presentation has to take place. So from the date set when the presentation is given, the clock is ticking. For 2 weeks, they've got to submit the presentation, and within 2 weeks after that, they have to then give the presentation in their EPA. That is stated on the assessment plan. That's what happens. So they've got a 4-week time frame. The question is, what happens if the presentation doesn't meet the criteria? Then again, the presentation is not just about the visual, it's about the oral explanation. So the assessor will look at it and use the questioning to bring out the most of the person to hit the criteria as much as they can up to distinction. My advice is the presentation should hit every criteria linked to this assessment method, and it be annotated on the presentation where it is. I think that makes life easier for the apprentice, the training provider, the employer, and for the endpoint assessment organisation. What the presentation should cover, and this again is a very, very loose sort of areas that it should cover, and this is the guidance from the assessment plan. Identification of the topic area being covered, overview of the activities being undertaken and how they relate to the roles, the results of the chosen activities and lessons learned, and what was achieved as a result of the activities. And this is a case of the learner, especially about what was achieved, the results and lessons learned. It's a good way of getting distinctions because we want some evaluation in there, we want some analytical work in there as well. So it's a great way of hitting everything in the presentation. How the presentation, the format it would take, preferably PowerPoint or Prezi, but again, people, you can use flip charts, drawing materials, videos, computers. They're free to use whatever medium they wish, posters, slides, handouts. And what will happen is it will be given in a controlled environment where the only person present will be the apprentice and the independent assessor. So there were no employer present, it would be just the independent assessor and the learner. The time frame of that, the presentations and questions in whole will last about 50 minutes. And what they're saying is there's a 10% dispensation, so you've got another extra 5 minutes if needed. The presentation, they reckon, will typically last 20 minutes and the questioning will typically last 30 minutes. That's what they're looking for, so the whole 50 minutes. So as you can see, there's a bit more questioning. So we're expecting the learner to have additional notes around their presentation in order to answer the questions from the independent assessor. And the questions were based upon the criteria that is allocated to that assessment standard. There can be a break between the presentation and the question and answers. And that will be dependent on the independent assessor listening to the presentation, checking that they've met the criteria, and then summing up in that 10 minutes break what they still need to ask them in order to either obtain or hopefully get the distinction grade. And that will be, extra questions will be in light of the presentation. Okay. The presentation, the independent assessor during that Q&A session will ask a minimum of 5 questions, and one of the questions for each one will be out of the knowledge, skills and behaviour groups, which are team building and development, communication, organisational cultural strategy, problem solving and data analysis. The follow-up questions are used to seek clarification. So if the person during the presentation has not touched very much on data analysis, and maybe they haven't talked about the wider implications of a project they were doing in relation to forecasting budgets, and they haven't talked about that, that's when the follow-up questions can be used to drive that person to obtain that pass grade and obtain distinction grade. Okay. As mentioned, the independent assessor will use their judgment when asking follow-up questions, any aspect that wasn't clear in the presentation, and that they will allow the apprentice to evidence occupational competence at highest level available, unless the apprentice has already achieved the highest grade available. So that Q&A session is a way of the assessor allowing the person to get the pass criteria and develop the distinction criteria. As I've mentioned, that is just one aspect of it, which is the presentation. The second aspect of it is a portfolio along with a Q&A session. The portfolio has to be submitted along with a mapping matrix to all the KSBs assigned to that, and it's got to be done in the form of an electronic portfolio. That's what we would prefer, is an electronic portfolio. The guidance on this is the portfolio should be completed whilst the apprentice is on programme. In other words, the evidence that's submitted in there has got to be current and in with the time frame that the person has been working on while their apprenticeship. The format and the structure, that will be agreed between the employer and the apprentice, and the mapping document will state where the evidence is and what format it is. The main issue here, and it's most important, is this. They are not allowed to submit reflective accounts and self-evaluation, and there should be no forms of self-assessment. What it should contain is written accounts of activities that have been completed and referenced to the relevant knowledge, skills and behaviours. And I'm going to go into a little bit more about this when we do what makes a good portfolio. What they're also saying, and what we're also asking, is you may have written accounts to meet the criteria and the knowledge, skills and behaviours, but that should be backed up with other evidence, such as witness testimonies, reports, minutes, observation reports. But what they're saying is the main source of evidence here has to be written accounts of activities. They cannot be hypothetical activities, or they have to be done in like a retrospective way and backed up with other forms of evidence that underpins the criteria that you'll be claiming for that learner. What they're also asking in the new assessment plan, there should be at least one piece of evidence relating to the knowledge, skills and behaviours stated for that apprenticeship, for that part of the assessment. And each piece of evidence has to be referenced against the criteria, and it can be one or more. The 4 areas that they would be looking for in a portfolio are building a high performance team, the project management, information governance and managing self. So the components of that, and that will be in our EPA toolkit, the breakdown of the criteria and the distinction grades and the pass grades. All of this has to be met within the portfolio. The duration of that's going to be at 60 minutes. what will happen is the portfolio is submitted at Gateway, and the assessor will look at the portfolio, and from that be able to then take questioning from that. The apprentice and the assessor will have their portfolio available during that professional discussion, and they can refer to it as and when necessary. Again, the dispensation of the time frame is given. So for the 60 minutes, you can add another 6 minutes on for maybe the apprentice to answer the last question. What will happen during that interview of the 60 minutes and that professional discussion, the independent assessor will select 6 competency-based questions. Each endpoint assessment organisation, including ourselves, has a bank of competency questions, and that will be based to prompt the learner to give an answer. What happens is you will look at the portfolio and you'll think, brilliant area there. I'd like to maybe use a competency question at a distinction level there, because I can see through the portfolio that they've done A, B, C, and D, which is absolutely brilliant, but I'd like them to get to a distinction level. So I'm going to ask them about A, B, C, and D, but then use a competency-based question in relation to the distinction. Because the other thing is they're asking, is stating the assessor can ask further questions for clarification and to give the apprentice opportunity to cover the KSB's map to this assessment method. So I was talking to Matt yesterday regarding why are they stipulating the number of questions, and I think it's come from they've looked at the team leader standard, they've looked at the assessment plan and EPA, and I think some endpoint assessment organisations were just using 1 or 2 questions and saying they've got a distinction. And I think they've stated this 6 competency-based questions as a minimum that we should be asking. And it's like the presentation, it's, you know, it was like the minimum of 5 questions. I think that's where it's come from. Maybe wrong, I don't know, but I feel that is a way of ensuring that that's a minimum that has to be done. The 6 competency-based questions, the endpoint organisation, including us ourselves at Summit, has a bank of competency questions. So if the person has to resit this element, they will not get the same competency-based questions. So each learner will get different competency-based questions, and it'll be a rolling bank of questions which are then reviewed every 6 months. What we ask learners to do, and it's in our EPA kits as well, is when they're actually answering or talking in their professional discussion to use the STAR method. So what was the situation, what was the task that you completed, what was the action, how did you do it, and the results. Now that comes from coaching the learner before EPA, using their portfolio and using the STAR method to get them to actually really delve into their portfolio and really sort of elaborate on a lot of the points, because one of the things is detail. And I'll go into a bit more, bit more detail on that when I look what makes a good portfolio. Do you have any questions so far? All quiet?
No, I think we're okay for the moment, Janet. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. Brilliant. Okay. Okay. I mentioned before about grading. As you can see here, what they're saying is, in order to obtain a pass, they've got to pass all the criteria from assessment method 1, which is the presentation, and they've got to pass all the criteria for assessment method 2, which is the professional discussion underpinned by portfolio evidence, in order to attain a pass. Unfortunately, if the person fails the presentation and then gets a distinction in their professional discussion, unfortunately, they've failed. So looking at this, there is only 3 ways to get a pass and only 1 way now to get distinction. In order to get distinction, they have to have distinction in both assessment method 1 and assessment method 2. There are 3 ways to get a pass and 1 way to get a distinction. Looking at Summit and how we would implement this and how we're going to implement this, we go through a timeline. The assessment plan states that the apprentice has 4 months to complete the EPA for the new team leader supervisor assessment plan. Hopefully it won't take 4 months, but that's the maximum time frame they've got. What we have is a stage process and a flow chart. So what we're saying at that gateway, the gateway documents uploaded, so your gateway declaration, the portfolio of evidence, and the matrix will go into there, and the presentation topic and title will be set by the independent endpoint assessor, and that's in agreements with the apprentice and the employer. That might not come on day one when the gateway documents. It might be that the independent assessor will contact a couple of days after the gateway documents have been checked and verified, and then set the title. That's when the clock will start ticking for the 2 weeks for submission. Stage 2 is what will happen is the independent assessor will look at the portfolio, that they will check all the KSBs have been referenced and prepare questions for the endpoint assessment. And after that 2-week period, within the first 10 working days, the apprentice will submit the presentation to Summit. Stage 3, what happens after that? Once the presentation has been submitted, a date for endpoint assessment will be agreed. That will be within 10 working days of receiving their presentation. What we aim to do, and each learner is differently, but the presentation has to be done within 2 weeks of submission. And most apprentices will say, well, I'd rather do my presentation and professional discussion on the same day. They don't have to. That's totally up to them. But a lot seem to want to do that. They'll maybe do the presentation in the morning and then do professional discussion in the afternoon. What we're saying is the only thing that's on a time frame is on the presentation. The professional discussion we'd like to do afterwards, because often with the presentation, the learner feels in control, feel less nervous after it because they feel more in control, and the professional discussion is a little bit more at ease. So the EPA takes place with the professional discussion and the presentation. And then what happens that within 10 working days of that assessment, the independent assessor will upload the documents, videos and assessable components, and then informed of the results. And then, of course, certificates will then be claimed. Okay. So that was a brief, very brief overview of the new assessment plan for the team leading supervisor. Does anybody have any questions?
Right, so I can see a question here in chat, Janet. So Alex Austin is asking, what is apprentice start date relevant to the new EPA? At what stage should the matrix be submitted?
Right, the matrix should be submitted when the portfolio is submitted at Gateway. So, you know, it's one of the Gateway documents that has to be submitted is the matrix in relation and the portfolio. So both go together. So there'll be a electronic portfolio goes through, plus the matrix sheet will go through at the same time. The matrix sheet is like an index, really. It's what it is and where it is within that portfolio. And I'll go into a little bit more about the portfolio in the next presentation I'll do in a couple of minutes. The first question was Matt.
Alex also asked, what is the relevance of the start date in relation to the new EPA? So I think he's asking how long do they need to be on program?
Yeah, this assessment plan came out on 25th or 26th of June. So anybody that has started their team lead apprenticeship after that date will be using this endpoint assessment. Anybody previously that will be using the old one. But what they've said is anybody that's currently on program before the 26th of June can use this endpoint assessment if they wish to. So what they're saying is they're giving you a license to say, okay, I prefer the apprentice prefers to just do the 2 assessment methods. So therefore we can use, and we call it APO3, which is the new assessment plan. but they don't have to. But any apprentice registered for their apprenticeship after the 26th of June has to use this new assessment plan. Does that answer your question?
I believe that should there, Janet. I've got another question here from Claire. So she's asking, is the CPD log not a requirement anymore?
That's additional evidence. If I flick up the slides about what type of things should be in their portfolio, as you can see, there's a CPD log there. Yeah, so it's not going to be used as a basis of that discussion, professional discussion anymore. It's an additional piece of evidence to written accounts.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would just like to add to that there, Janet. I feel that whilst it's not a hard set requirement as it was in the past, it would most certainly be a very useful piece of evidence to include in the portfolio to complement any of the KSBs that they've been working towards doing that.
I agree with you totally, Matt, because one of the areas that they look at is this one, which is managing self. That has to be within that portfolio. How could that is a great source of evidence, is the CPD log and the personal development plan. Definitely a great source, yeah.
Janet, I've just got another question from Alex here as well, just asking, and PDP2. So I think they're just referring to, do they need to include that as well? Again, it's the same as the CPD log. I would highly recommend that. As Janet has said, one of the main areas that they're targeting is that management of self.
Yeah, and that is, I mean, if you think about it, the old standard, the management of self, was assessed in that CPD log, that interview allowed in the CPD log. So with the assessment criteria saying is managing self is one of the components, I would expect the CPD log to be in that, yeah, and a personal development plan. But again, it is, they have not stipulated it has to be, but I think recommended it should be within that.
There we are. So Janet, we've got three more questions here. So the first from Leah. She said, hello to everyone, and just asking, will we provide the matrix template?
We will do, yes, we will provide the matrix template for you. Yes, yes.
Excellent. I've now got two quite similar questions, one from Andrew and one from Carol. Andrew's saying that obviously we've said that there should not be any reflective accounts or self-assessment in the portfolio. He's asking, would a CPD log be in conflict with that?
No, because a CPD log is not the main source of evidence. It's this, the written accounts. A CPD log would only back up a written account of that activity.
There we are. And then just to follow on from that, Janet, oh, sorry, Carol has said, how can they show managing self without reflection or self-assessment?
Yes, I agree with that, and I think it's reflective accounts cannot be used as included as evidence. Now, the written account, I was having a chat with you about this, Matt, once yesterday about we've got to be very careful about how the written account is actually done. I think when I go on to the next presentation about the contents of a portfolio, what makes it make it a little bit clearer, but what we're saying with the written accounts, it's who, what, why, where and how. Why did they take it? Or a CPD? You know, what was the CPD? How did they take that CPD? What did they get out of that CPD? That is not a reflective account. A reflective account is about opinions they have, about how they felt about it. That is the main source of evidence, is your written account, is your main source of evidence, which is then supported by this. So with the written accounts, it's the who, what, why, where and how, or it could be the STAR method, it could be anything. If you think about it as if you've been an assessor as long as I have, when a person does a written account of something, you want to know who did what, when, how, why, and at what time. Yeah, that's a written account of something. A reflective account is I did this and I felt that didn't go well. And it's more of an opinionated statement more than an account. So what I've suggested for learners when they do written accounts is it's like it has to read like I would read it and literally I could do exactly what you did after reading that, because it's an actual documentation of what you actually did. So I can understand why you say there's no self-reflection in there. There will be some self-reflection. Of course, there has to be in a CPD log, but it's not the main source of evidence. It's supporting evidence backing up that written account. Does that help, Alex, at all?
Carol, did that help at all there?
Okay. Yeah, Janet, I just have one other question. Well, Carol's replied back saying a little. It's helped a little. So maybe you can clarify that point a little later when you talk about the portfolio.
Okay. Yeah.
But I just wanted to elaborate on a question earlier from Karen regarding the titles for the presentation.
No problem. Yeah.
So do these titles include ones that you have added? So how many core ones do we get, and how many do we add, etc.? Can you just like you to elaborate on that one a little bit? Thank you.
Yeah. The titles, 4 of them are being produced by the Trailblazer group in relation to the assessment plan. They just gave us examples, and 3 we've added to ours. And the presentation is what would there was no. They've given us very little guidance on how we are allowed to formulate our own presentation titles as an endpoint assessment organisation. And I know some other endpoint assessment organisations have added a couple more, like we have, but a lot are just keeping with the 4, which are, I think, the top 4 here, that the assessment plan states can be used as a title. So I think it's still in development, this, and what they're trying to do is try and get in as much evidence out of a title where the person can show as much of the criteria just using a title. I think it's still work in development with the assessment plan, because I think unless I think the feedback from the EPA Endpoint Assessment Organisations to the Trailblazer group, if they are struggling or need guidance for changes of these titles, but they're the ones that they are suggesting. So at this present time, I think that's what we're going to go. That's what we will go with. But again, it's what other the Trailblazer group will give us guidance on in relation to changing this, and what our EQA would also give us guidance on in relation to changing some of these titles. To me, these titles are, and I don't know about everybody else, but they're quite far-ranging, really. Managing a project within an organisation, within their organisation, is such a large title that anything and everything could be brought in that. I think some of them limit, like supporting a team through a period of change. Well, a period of change could be a project. So again, I think what they've done, they've made the titles so open to interpretation that anything can be put in that. What they're saying is that's the title, but what they want from that title is covering these elements. That's what they're saying. But most importantly is covering the criteria attached to that. That's what they're looking for. How the titles change, if the titles change at this present time, I don't know, because it's been so new, but these are the 4 that the assessment plan authors gave us, and we've come up with a couple more as well to add to that. Okay. Yes, Matt.
Yes, no, I was just going to say I think that should help with Karen's question there. And
Brilliant.
as for Carol's question regarding the sort of managing self without reflection or self-assessment, that will be covered as we go through the next presentation of what makes a good portfolio.
Yeah, okay. So if there isn't no more questions on this area.
No, we've not had any more questions come through on the chat.
Okay, so without further ado, we will look at what makes a good portfolio. Okay. Now, I've been referring to the generic, I'm talking generally about a portfolio, but I'm also going to be quite specific about the new level 3 portfolio. So I'm referring to APO3, which is the title at the top of the EPA assessment plan. So it's like the 3rd edition. So when I sat down and thought about this, and I thought, well, what does make a good portfolio? And I was speaking to Matt yesterday about this. I was saying, what does make a good portfolio? And we both came to the conclusions, if you want to chip in, Matt, we both said something that's easy to, you can find things and it contains everything you want it to contain. Would you agree, Matt?
Yes, no, certainly. I think another thing that we very clearly agreed on is stereotypically a good portfolio is always going to be clear and concise. So answers are going to be answered in full wherever possible, as well as sort of with enough detail but still being concise. So avoid a lot of superfluous information.
Yes, yeah, no, that's what we thought. Now, what they're saying in the assessment plan guidance, and we've covered this before in the previous presentation, they would have prepared a portfolio of evidence during the programme, and it's to support the professional discussion. That portfolio will not be assessed by the endpoint assessor. It is only used to support the professional discussion. So the assessor will be assessing the answers and the explanations the learner gives, the apprentice gives, not the portfolio. That's highly need to stipulate that. They will not be assessing the portfolio. The portfolio will have a mapping document, a matrix, which clearly shows how the evidence meets the is mapped against the relevant knowledge, skills and behaviours. And if you remember back the old paper portfolios we used to use, and it had an index sheet at the front and it would say knowledge 1 is met on page 14 and it's a written account. It's nothing major, this mapping matrix. It's the where is it, what's the reference number, what type of evidence is this?
Yeah, we just had a question come through here, Janet, from Alex. Do we have the mapping document? At the moment, Alex, no, we don't, but that will be provided.
I have. I don't have it on here now, but Summit have their own mapping document, which we submit. What happens is, once you register with EPA, we then send you the mapping document, and then you can then start drawing your evidence together and filling in the mapping document. So yes, we do have that already. Yeah.
There we are.
Okay. I mentioned before, just to go over again, reflective accounts and self-assessment should not be included in the APO3. Mentioned this about before, contain activities that have been referenced, and these written accounts will be referenced against the relevant knowledge, skills and behaviours. I've mentioned all that before and I'm going to go into a massive detail. The content of the portfolio must be sufficient to evidence the that the apprentice met all the relevant skills, knowledge and behaviours. Now that comes from, as an assessor and a training provider, you will look at it and go, does that actually meet what is required? If it doesn't, there may be another piece of evidence that you need to put in. So that what they're saying is there must be at least one piece of evidence relating to each of the KSBs mapped to this assessment method. Now, the one piece of evidence would be, and I would be just personally speaking, I wouldn't say it's not written down this and it's not stated anywhere, but I would think one written account relating to each knowledge and skill. The behaviours are often integrated within that, but I think one written account of the knowledge, skill and possibly the behaviour. I think that would make your life easier, because you can then say there's a written account about that plus supporting evidence, written account about that plus supporting evidence. What we're also saying is each piece of evidence can be referenced to more than one knowledge, skill, or behaviour. So if the written account talks about their skills, but also brings in their behaviours, such as resilience, you can then map it towards that behaviour as well. The recommendation from the assessment plan is 20 pieces of evidence. That's the recommendation. Now, I was speaking to Matt yesterday, and we would say if it's not the quantity, it's the quality of a piece of evidence. We're not saying it has to be dead on 20, but the recommendation would be around 20 pieces of evidence.
As you know, Jan just said, with the emphasis being on quality, if should you submit a portfolio that's less than 20 pieces of evidence, but the quality of those pieces of evidence is of a higher standard and it contains more of the knowledge, skills and behaviours within them, that's absolutely fine. The main thing is that all of the knowledge, skills and behaviours are met within that portfolio, regardless of length. And what we're suggesting is, by best practice, to be as concise as possible, because should you have 80 pieces of evidence, it is very easy to lose the specificity of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I agree totally there. And if, you know, as an assessor myself, I'd rather see, you know, a page where the evidence literally jumps out at me, more than 6 pages where I'm struggling to find any evidence. And we do get learners that do that. They can write reams and reams and reams and they've missed the point. So a lot of guidance will be needed in relation to the content of the written accounts that they're going to give them and the supplementary evidence that attaches to that. So it's that what we're specifically looking for within that is clear as a bell. And it's clear to the learner, because they're going to be using that portfolio in that professional discussion. They're going to have it in front of them. So if the assessor talks about, can you tell me a time that you've managed a project within your work environment, and how did you manage your team in that? They can then, they've got that portfolio right in front of them to look down on and go, ah, that's where it is, it's on page 6. Oh yeah, and that's like their little trigger to talk about it. Matt and I were discussing a couple of times about learners that come into EPA at the moment with, and you ask them about a situation and they struggle to come up with an example to give. Would you agree with that, Matt?
Yes, certainly. A lot of the times learners will either feel flustered, or with the notes that they have on hand, because they're so brief, don't necessarily immediately feel comfortable with all the examples that they're trying to give, and they try to overcomplicate things as well. So what we were saying yesterday, having the portfolio in front of them now for this new assessment plan should make a massive difference to the way that they're able to answer questions, because they'll have all of their evidence in front of them during the process.
I agree with you totally. I mean, in other endpoint assessments that I've done, which has not been team leading, where the assessment plan hasn't stipulated they can't take anything in, I have to get them to take in all sorts of notes and prompt sheets and anything so it can jig the memory during that stressful time to come up with some really good examples. And well, I think the contents of the portfolio should be the best written examples of when they've completed them knowledge, skills and behaviours. They might have done it on a day in, day out basis every day, but the written account they're going to be using for their endpoint is where it shows them in the brightest light, where they've got the most KSBs met, and it's getting them up to distinction level or hitting distinction level. So they may have 20 pieces of evidence that they want to put in, but then it's a case of, well, which one do we put in that meets exactly the KSBs and meets it at a higher level? And it's also concise in meeting that.
Yes, Janet. We've got two questions here now. So the first one from PB. Why is the mapping document supplied at the end? Wouldn't it make sense to map as you go along?
You can do, but you can do that yourself. You are also, as a training provider, you have access to the assessment plan, as everybody does, and it will show you the KSBs that have to be met with in that assessment method. So, you know, it's stipulated that maybe K1, K3, K5.2 is going to be me. So, yeah, I can take that to Summit and say to them, you know, can we have the mapping document ready for the people to use before they submit? I can take that to them as well. But I always think that a training provider can also develop their own mapping document. It is, you know, the assessment plan tells you exactly what criteria it was, where it meets it, what type of evidence. What I've also done is some amplification around that, and that's when we've come into is the amplification of the types of, not types of situations and what the content we're looking for. But yeah, I can't see any problem putting the mapping document for everybody to use. But really, it is nothing, as I said, it's nothing actually spectacular. It's just where is it? Where is it meeting that part? Tell me what piece of evidence it is. That's all the mapping document is. It's not a case of that will meet that, that will meet that, that will meet that. It's very simply an index, really. That's what they're looking for, is just an index.
Thank you there, Janet. PB, I hope that answers your question there. In addition to that, Carol has asked, with an electronic portfolio, surely it is already mapped. With that there, Carol, I've seen several e-portfolios, and that would depend on how they're set up for the particular qualification. Obviously, you can map into that or put all the different sort of areas into your e-portfolio to build that mapping structure within that. Obviously, what we're saying is, should you have an e-portfolio where it is simply used as an electronic store, we've got our mapping document, which when signing on with us as the EPA, that would then be provided for you there.
What worries me about that, and I mean, you can shoot me down if I'm wrong, but if the assessor, while they're through their apprenticeships going, oh, that's a great piece of evidence to put in the portfolio, I'll put that in the portfolio. What worries me is the apprentice aware of what's in that portfolio that's going to be submitted? I'll go later on into that. They've got to know it back to front, inside out, upside down. They've got to know what's in that portfolio. And collecting it as you go along, great, and saying that's great for that, that'd be great for that. it might then, once it's all accumulated, though it's ready, is the apprentice aware of what's in that? And why is it better than others? And I think, you know, other pieces of evidence that was about the same thing, why is that one better? And I think the emphasis is on is understanding that the apprentice knows what's going in that portfolio. My thoughts about this is the electronic portfolio is a case of Word documents and photographs, journals, recordings, all zipped in a file and submitted to the endpoint assessment that way. That's electronic to me. It doesn't have to be through one file or smart assessor. It could be an amalgamation of everything all in a zip file and sent. That's electronic to me. So it doesn't have to be through the format of one file or smart assessor. Electronic can be used in a zip file or in a OneDrive, where it can be packaged all together and then extracted out all the different types of the evidence. That's my thoughts, more than using likes of one file and smart assessor and everything else, or the electronic portfolios. But again, you know, if people have got other ideas and this is what this webinar is about, please share. Please share. Any more
There we go.
questions?
Thank you, Janet. I think that would have answered Carol's question there. I'd just like to add to that look, we are just asking for the evidence in an electronic format. If you have a set electronic e-portfolio that you use, that you're comfortable with, provided you can make sure that both the assessor and the apprentice are able to use that and they're both fully aware of exactly what is in that portfolio, then by all means continue to do that.
Well, yeah, I think the other thing is, once you have an electronic portfolio, if you're taking that into the endpoint assessment, the learner will be flicking through screens, looking for the evidence, looking for in one file where it is. You're relying on a good internet signal. There's, you know, I think there's so many things that could go wrong with that. Whereas maybe having it electronic printed or a resume of what it contains and where it is like the mapping matrix, and then at the back is, oh, that's on my audio visual, and that's on a piece that was on my product evidence. I think that's a bit easier for the learner, more than logging into an online portfolio, getting the evidence up, hoping there's a good internet signal. I think that portfolio of evidence, like I said, it's only going to be like around about 20 pieces of evidence plus supporting. The written accounts are the main source of the evidence. So the written accounts can be on Word documents that they can print off and go through highlighter pens. And so it just prompts them to keywords, key situations. That's my thoughts. I mean, I might be wrong. I mean, I'm old fashioned, but I think, you know, I like the written word. And I think learners, when they're sat face to face with an assessor on a screen, they would struggle. Written words right in front of them that's got highlighted pens and stars across it and say, mention this. I think that would be easier for them. But you know, I'm open to comments or suggestions from anybody else.
Thank you there, Janet. We've got no more questions at the moment there.
Okay. Yeah.
Actually, sorry, can I ask a question, please? It's just a little bit long to be writing in the chat box, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem, Leah.
Yes.
Yeah. So in terms of I'm looking at the written account and thinking that what that has got to produce. Oh, sorry. Thinking of the written account and what that has to produce.
Yes.
And we've got on our system now, we used to use one file, as Carol says she does, but we've come away from that and created something quite similar on our own hub. But what we have is a set of questions after our knowledge unit, and also a set of questions after the skills unit, which is obviously the knowledge focuses on answering the knowledge part, but the skills asks the learner to give examples and say, we may have done this and what was the result of this. So would those documents pulled off our system and presented as Word documents, would they fulfil the criteria of being a written account, or does it have to be more of a narrative from the learner?
I personally, I think it's more of a narrative from a learner.
It's going to contain the same
because it's the application of knowledge, skills, and behaviours. The application of knowledge, and I'll go further when I've got a few more slides, but I'm going to talk about the application of knowledge. If you're asking a knowledge question, often it's very one-dimensional. So if you, I don't know, I'll give you an example.
But we've asked it. No, I know what you mean. You're saying, do I know this? Yes, I do know it, but it's evidencing that you've learned it.
Exactly, and evidence you've
on our skills assessment, what we have asked is that the learner using a model or a theory that they've learned in the knowledge section, how have they done? Let's just say, for example, how have they chaired a meeting, but using the knowledge that they have. So they might include a communication cycle or something, and we have to apply it. So
and then as an assessor or training provider, you have to look at the criteria and say 100% does that match that criteria? 100%. That's what you've got to look at. And is it the best example I can give that the learner can elaborate up to a distinction level using that example? If they can, brilliant. Yeah, it's electronic format. Yeah, it's a Word document. Great. But it's also, is it useful for the learner to have in front of them? Would they be able to use that as a visual cue, which, you know, a good portfolio is, that they can then, if I was talking to them about communication and I was saying, you know, how does the Tuckman's model affect the people you work with, new members of staff, would they be able to go through their portfolio and think easy enough to find that evidence, or would they struggle to find it in the format that it's in? Do you see where I'm coming from?
I do.
Yeah.
Because the questions have been written to the endpoint standard,
yes.
Then the idea is that it ties directly back to that. You answer this question, you give an example, answering with the STAR model.
That's fine. Yeah.
And you're going to by default.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it would have supporting documents as well. I'm just aware of having them now do a separate written account on top of all the writing, if you like, that they've done.
Yeah, maybe what they're doing is already a written account, as long as it's not a reflective account or a self-assessment.
It's not reflective at all. We have a reflective box, but that then goes into their CPD.
That's fine. Yeah. I mean, from what you can see, it sounds fine as long as you can hand on heart that meets the KSBs that I'm claiming. It's also it's meeting them. It is a description. It is. I'm going to go into later about the action verbs. It is a good explanation that they've done A, B, C, D, and E. Yeah. Then their format can come in. You know, it can come on scraps of paper for all I care. The written accounts. You know, I mean, as long as it's A, that we can find the KSBs in that and use that as a basis for our professional discussion, but B, that you said on the matrix sheet, that piece of evidence meets that.
Yeah, and that leads on to another question. Thank you for that, because that
no
sort of leads me to my other question that I had on evidence in the knowledge. Obviously, traditionally, the knowledge test has been taken place as such. So it's evidence in knowledge within a portfolio that's traditionally a skills-based portfolio. And that sort of was a query for that about how are they going to do we have to start writing out the knowledge? And that's sort of where the questions, can we use the questions that's already done, come in type thing.
Yeah, I think with knowledge, it's been a case of what do you understand about, can you explain about, right? It's very one-dimensional. So if you're asking them about, I don't know, let's go back onto Tuckman's theory, okay? What are the stages of Tuckman theory, right? they know it, but how do they apply it?
Mm.
And what I would say to them is, you know, what are the 4 stages of the Tuckman theory? Yeah, okay. Can you complete a written account of when a new member of a couple of members of the new members of the team came in? Can you actually then say what the forming or storming or norming behaviours were? And it shows you that they kind of have took the knowledge in and can apply it to situations in the workplace. That's what they're looking for. So I would give an example. If I was a learner, I'd say, okay, I've got to talk about the forming norming. So when I first met the team for the first time, they all had their own agendas. They all wanted to do slightly different things, which I can see is the form, you know, the forming stage of Tuckman's. You see where I'm coming from with that? And then the storming stage, I could really see, because we were all arguing about who should do what and when, and people were falling out with. You see where I'm coming from? It's like it's like a written account, but bringing the knowledge in to explain things.
So so the written account then it goes beyond, it does go beyond the STAR, because there has to be some level of sort of description in there, isn't it? What you're asking the learners to do is quite a high level of transference of their knowledge, really. So it isn't just a test, isn't it?
No, it's application. And I think that's why they've changed and got rid of the test, because a test is a great way of assessing the person. No, but does the person use that knowledge within their workplace? And that's why I think they've said about the written accounts, it's the application of the knowledge. Yeah.
In addition to that, Leah, I think this will add on to what you're asking here. We've had a question from Andrew saying, the standard doesn't signpost specific theories though. Are you expecting certain theories to have been taught? What if the learner has been taught about different ones to that which the EPA asks about?
No, they won't. They won't be. We won't be asking about Tuckman's theory. What we would say is, can you talk about within a team development? We wouldn't ask them to quote a theorist. No, we would never do that. But what we want to see in their evidence is they have took into account in their written accounts a theorist of any description in relation to team building or managing a team or managing self or anything like that. We're not stipulating. We would never ask at this level, tell me what you know about Adair's model or Belbin or anything like that. We wouldn't, because each person is taught different things and it's in different relations to different things as well. We would talk about probably a Gantt chart, or some of them call them an A3 planner, or I've had all sorts, it's called different things. But as long as we can see evidence of things like that within it, because we're not exactly asking for specific theorists, no.
So just to sort of summarize that there for you, Andrew, the main thing that this new assessment plan is looking for is it's moving away from the parrot fashion of what is this and an explanation. It's moving more towards direct application, and as what they initially set out to do with these endpoint assessments is to prove competency and use of what they've been learning. So we would, as Janet said, we would never specifically ask about a theory. It would be more surrounding how have they implemented anything that they have learned, or the learner explaining to us how they've taken something such as a theory and implemented that in how they operate day to day.
I think that was, I mean, originally when the new standards were set, that was the difference between the old frameworks and these, is the application and the of the knowledge, skills and behaviours, more than knowing the knowledge, skills and behaviours. It's the application. That's the difference. And I think that is one of the main reasons why they've changed this assessment plan to got rid of the knowledge, because to me, I think the knowledge test was good, but it didn't show how a learner has implemented that knowledge or utilised that knowledge. And I didn't think it gave it scope to evaluate the knowledge as well, and evaluate it in the workplace. And it's good PowerPoints. And I was telling Matt yesterday, I had a learner who convinced me Maslow's triangle was upside down. and he gave me examples in the workplace of how he thought that was right. And he actually convinced me at one point. And I mean, he got a distinction, but he was using the application of the knowledge, the knowledge he had, and looking at the workplace and applying it in the workplace. That's what they're looking for. It's the application of the knowledge to guide them, to influence them, to change their practices, to inform them. That's what we're looking for within that knowledge written accounts, because it's too one-dimensional just asking him a question. Okay, I'm a bit worried.
Thank you there, Janet. We currently don't have any more questions.
Okay, brilliant. The guidance also suggests that any employer contribution should focus on the direct observations of evidence. So the extra evidence, what they're saying is direct observation of evidence, witness statements rather than opinions. And that's something I've got. What is a good witness testimony? And that's something we have on Summit. And what makes a good witness testimony? What we're looking for in a witness testimony? Because often when you've asked witness testimony, you get a multitude of all sorts of weird and wonderful things. But a witness testimony, if it's written well, is worth a lot of you know, it's a lot of credit within that witness testimony that even can implicate that the person is the skills and behaviours within that witness testimony. The evidence provided must be valid and attributable to the apprentice, and it has to have a statement containing from the employer confirming this. So that will be in the matrix document, the authenticity document, and at the beginning that portfolio is the apprentice and it's all the apprentice's work. Of course, that rules out anything like plagiarism, copying off other people, etc. The portfolio of evidence must be submitted, as mentioned at Gateway, and the portfolio I've mentioned is not directly assessed. It's so we don't look at it and go, that piece of evidence definitely meets KS1, that meets skills 5.2. We don't do that. It underpins the professional discussion. So we would look at a piece of evidence that's been mapped to skills 1.1, and then we would talk about that in the professional discussion. Because I think what they've done with this new assessment plan is it's all right having a beautiful portfolio that's got lots of work, but really does the apprentice understand it and can actually amplify what they've done with them written accounts and the professional discussion. And that's what they're checking, that skills, behaviours and knowledge is applied in the workplace and shows development. That's what I think the emphasis has changed. As mentioned before, the assessment method of the professional discussion with the portfolio, these are the 4 areas they will be looking at. Okay. And I broke one of them down into building a high performance team. So I then broke what are the knowledge, skills and behaviours within that criteria, within that title, and within the portfolio, they have to show where they have met that. So I was asking Matt yesterday, could we have more than one piece of evidence showing that? And about half met on one piece of evidence and half met on another. Ideally, no, we wouldn't like that. But sometimes there may be, it does not hit the mark with that, and we can't do it anymore because it can't be a self-reflection. So we might have to add something else to it. But ideally, we'd like one piece of evidence and supporting evidence backing each one of these up. Now, the behaviours might then cross into the skills, so that doesn't matter, but definitely you would have evidence specifically for knowledge and skills. Okay, but it might be one piece of evidence for 2 skills. Highly unlikely to be one piece of evidence for 2 knowledge, but then again, we don't know. But we have to then show through a written account and supplementary evidence that person understands people and team management models, including team dynamics and motivation techniques. And so that's what we've got to look for with all of those. And that's just one part of it. What will happen?
Just
no problem, Mark.
Sorry there, Janet. Just to add to that there, what we're trying to say here is that in terms of best practice, wherever possible, try to answer the questions in full and as concisely as possible within one piece of evidence. We know that this is never going to be possible with everything. However, in terms of best practice, we would highly recommend that you try to do this wherever possible and keep the part met criteria down to as few as possible, just because it helps not only yourselves and the learners to minimize the volume of work that they are necessarily doing, but also make it a lot clearer for them to be able to see, yes, I've answered this criteria in this evidence, it's cut and dry, rather than 2 sort of half bits that you then have to piece together.
Okay, I'm just wary of the time a bit, and I know we did say 11:30, so I'm just going to move on. What we also give you is the pass and distinction, and this is on the assessment plan as well. So what is a pass? What is a distinction? So as you can see, the knowledge is the same. So if they're going to answer for KS 2.1, which is about understanding management and models and team dynamics, to get the evaluation, to get the distinction, they've got to evaluate that and the benefits and drawbacks with a written account. So literally, we can talk about, you know, when they've implemented this and the benefits and what happened and what was the drawbacks of it in relation to actually implementing that in the workplace.
So just to add to that there, Janet, so
yeah.
For everyone, the pass criteria is that they've described that particular knowledge element.
Yeah.
The
yeah.
distinction element for that is where they've actually evaluated it. So they've gone into that
yes.
extra level of detail, speaking about
yes.
the
yeah.
pros, cons,
yeah.
and actually making a conclusion regarding that as well.
And that can be met through the professional discussion, because they may have the beautiful written account about how they've actually motivated a team, sort of like setting objectives, doing appraisals and everything like that, talking emotional intelligence and good examples within that. And then the professional discussion might say, okay, you've told me all about this. What were the benefits and drawbacks of that? So that professional discussion is a great way of getting up to this level. Yeah. What I'm looking for here is these, they're called action verbs. You've probably heard this phrase before, and double criteria. Very clever, these are standards, because they will give you the action verb, and often it's the first one. So describe how they've developed. A good description, of course, is a written account. And it's describe, sorry about that, describe. So the best way of describing something is given an account of it. And then the evaluation is actually a written account, but using positive and negatives and good points and bad points. Now, somebody said that, but isn't that a self-reflection? And I was saying, no, if you are using work-based examples to give your answer, it's not a self-reflection then. In the past, I think people have evaluated using self-reflection by going, well, if I'd have done it this way, this would have happened, if I did it that way. That's what they're trying to stop, is what they're trying now to say is your evaluation should come about as a relation to thinking more in depth when you're applying it and how you've implemented it and what went well and what didn't go well. And I think that's what they've got away from, is the more than evaluating it hypothetically to evaluating it while they're actually doing it. And that, I think, is a big difference with this new standard. I remember with this criteria, building a high performance team, potential evidence for portfolio, remember the action verbs. So written accounts has got to be one. We've said the STAR method is a good way of getting that criteria. The who, what, why, where and how. Witness testimonies, that's great for the skills and behaviours and some of the knowledge, but it's implied knowledge. Observations are great for the skills and behaviours and knowledge, again implied. The professional discussion as add-ons, great for knowledge, skills and behaviours, examples with explanations. So they might have done a written account on implementing the motivation techniques with the team, and then you could back that up with a professional discussion about the behaviours that they demonstrated. How did you show this? How did you show that? So it's actually adding on to that as well as an extra. Work products, again, the work products have got to be contextualised. We do not want, I mean, I have our portfolio submitted, there's 20 spreadsheets in it, makes nothing to me. I have no idea what it's about. The learner knew what it's about. I have no idea. It's got to be contextualised to show the candidate's contribution. I was speaking to Matt about this yesterday, and we've had portfolios where they've attached a health and safety booklet. Well, it doesn't show me what the learner's done in relation to that health and safety booklet, but they know where to find a health and safety booklet. That's about all they know. But it's got to be contextualised to show how the candidate's contribution and their role in producing it. Some of the hints and tips I've got here is, of course, remember GDPR and data protection. So any of the written accounts have got to be anonymised. They've got to be, no, not contain names or any indicators that would jeopardise GDPR or data protection. Good use of holistic assessment that can cover more than one criteria. I think this compartmentalising sometimes works for some learners, holistic works for other learners. That depends on your learner, how they want to put together their portfolio. A great way of checking a portfolio before submission is use two sets of eyes, which I think the use of an IQA. They would look at it in a different way. They would look at the quality, they would look at specific areas. So before submission, I think it's a great way of getting an IQA to look at it, quality assure it or moderate it. I think something where there's another set of eyes on that for quality purposes. We've mentioned recommendation of 20 pieces, and we've mentioned about the quantity versus the quality. So again, we'd rather have 15 pieces of good quality than 45 pieces of poor quality. Make sure that the evidence exactly matches the criteria, and that I think is the most important thing. Involve the apprentice in developing that portfolio. In the past, I've seen training providers, assessors putting together a portfolio. That's great, and the learners asked about it and they don't know what's in it. They have no idea. They think, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, is it in there? I didn't realise that. They haven't been involved in that. They have to know it inside out, back to front and upside down, what's in there. The knowledge, skills and behaviour demonstrated in work environment, real examples, and that's not just for the past but for the distinction. What we also like to see is clean documents. In other words, if they've done a written account for high performance team, say, and you've gone in as an assessor or trained provider gone in and put some comments and you need to do this and that, we don't want them comments. We just need the clean documents that are ready for submission. So we don't need to see any of the comments or feedback from that. As I've mentioned, try to avoid knowledge questions only because they're too one-dimensional. With your professional discussions, please keep them clear. I was talking to Matt yesterday about this. I've had professional discussions that have been held in cafes on train stations, and I can hear everybody else's conversations in the background. I've heard plates clattering. You know, I need them as clear as possible. Please check the audio evidence or video evidence before submitting, that it's clear, that it can be, you know, you can hear it. Make them concise, and also the timings. We need time stamping on there where we can see the KSBs on the professional discussions. Please, when you're doing professional discussions or audio evidence, please introduce people and their role, the date and the consent given to that professional discussion or audio evidence. I've watched a couple of video evidences, and I didn't know which one was the apprentice because nobody introduced themselves. So I'm thinking, who's that? Are they the apprentice? I couldn't figure it out. So it's important to do the introductions and roles. Again, this is a quality thing, and assessors will do this in IQA. Making sure the evidence is valid. In other words, does it meet what it's saying? Is it reliable? You know, are all the witness statements all from the same person? You know, which we don't want. You know, is it current? How, you know, you don't want it like 12 months ago. Is it last 6 months, last 2 months? Has it been signed and dated? Is it authentic to the learner? And does it meet the whole criteria of efficiency? We've also produced we've got guidance on criteria descriptors, and we've amplified them to tell you exactly what we want. So what, you know, it's to say that this is what we're looking for. We'd expect this in here, we'd expect that in there. But a lot of places do amplification anyway, other APOs. As I've mentioned, the apprentice should know their portfolio inside out. It must be easy to locate the evidence. We've mentioned part-met criteria, as Mark mentioned. Try and avoid it, but sometimes it can't be. The witness testimonies, who provides them, what format, authenticity and sufficiency. Again, you'll have probably your own format for witness testimonies, but we were looking at, I want to know who they're from, what format it takes, are they authentic and is it sufficient? Annotating evidence, so the written accounts have to be annotated, like the old-fashioned style where we used to write the criteria that's been met. And I can't stipulate this word, detail, 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 more detail. The more detail that they put in, the better. It is easier for the learner then to recite this during that professional discussion. The more detail, the better. And the last bit, I always call this as a shad. The apprentice needs to show throughout the portfolio they know the knowledge, and I mean this, what the word is, throughout. Apply correctly the skill and display the behaviour. That's what we're looking for here, that they know and they can apply and display all of those. Any questions?
There we go. So in addition to these questions, if anyone could offer any difficulties that they have with EPAs in general, that we could possibly address in our next webinar.
Yeah.
One second, I think there's a question there. Yes, Claire, the answer to that is yes. So what I'll be doing is I'll be sending this presentation out rather soon after today, and you'll also be able to access it from our YouTube channel, and I'll sort of put the access on an email for the YouTube channel as well. So you can sort of click straight into it and sort of access it from there as well. And apart from that, you know, if you have any further comments, you know, please feel free to email me on epa@ior.org. When I send this out, I will put my contact details on there as well, so you can give me a call direct or email me as well if you have any further questions or any comments regarding the webinar today. Yeah, that's great. So, you know, just like to thank everyone again for attending. I do rather hope it's been useful for everybody. You know, until sort of next time, we'll sort of send out another invite for the next webinar for November with the title, and hopefully we look forward to sort of seeing you all then. But you know, I think sort of that's all for today. Brilliant. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you, everybody, and take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye.